Hey there, Dan. Can you introduce yourself for our participants here?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Daniel Mesec. I am a journalist with CICK News and the host of our CICK News show here in Smithers.
Excellent. So, as you know, I've asked you to be a presenter today because I want to talk about approaching interviews, because I think that quite a few of our participants are people who are about to start the interview process and maybe they don't have a ton of experience with it. So I was hoping that we could just break it down into some actual kind of step-by-step and helpful tips as to approaching the interview and then what to do with it after and to contextualize it.
Sure.
So what I'd like to start knowing is, how do you approach interviews? Because you have quite a range of the style of interviews that you do. So what would you say your kind of general approach is?
Yeah, I could even start with some technical advice.
Sure.
A lot of journalists out there will often keep notes and take notes while they're interviewing. I do that sometimes if the situation or circumstances provides the time and space to do that. But my style is more of conversational. I find that a lot of times when you run up to someone and you have something prepared or start taking notes right away, they don't necessarily give you the same answers as they would just in having a conversation. So having a voice recorder of some kind is usually the best. The phones these days have a voice recorder on it, so it's really easy just to pull out even your phone if you're doing a basic story, a written story, even an audio story. The sound is pretty good. So everything I do is always recorded. That's also part of I would call it a journalistic principle of making sure that things are on the record, and you need a physical record of that. And so making sure that you record it is always priority number one. You need to have a physical record so you can, one, be able to go back to that and reference it and make sure that it's accurate if you're using it in a print story for, say, a quote or whatnot. Or, of course, if you're doing audio, you want to have some clean sound in these clips that you can put into the audio story. So that being said, once you have that, in your pocket, carrying it around, whatever it is, the first thing I would do to approach an interview is if you have a story idea and you've figured out what your hook to the story is, you figure out who the players are. For instance, there's a story coming up that we'll be doing on the salmon crisis and the steelhead issue here. And there are two political people in particular that will be speaking about this. And so those would be two great interviews. And once you kind of figure that out, depending on who they are, if they're more of a high profile individual like a politician, you usually need to send a request into their office. So you could set up an official interview. So once you figure that out, who your audiences or who your interviews are going to be, you send out those requests. And once you have that secured, then you can dive into doing a little bit of research and trying to figure out, one, what is the hook and what are the issues that people are interested in that you'd like to ask about? And then two, who are these individuals that you're speaking with? You want to make sure that you're informed and have a little bit of background research to understand where these people are coming from so that you can tailor your questions to that individual and to the situation and the story.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So where do you get your ideas for stories then?
Honestly, everywhere and anywhere. One thing is, a good journalist is just a curious person by nature, I'd say. And so that being said, personally, I just follow many things, many news agencies. Obviously, social media is kind of the main communication highway these days. So, stuff like Instagram, Facebook, not to say that it is a place where you can accredit specific information, but if you see a news article or if you see someone posting something about said issue, it just at least piques your interest. One thing as well, oftentimes you see headlines that are maybe a little bit misleading. That's a big issue as well. Those could lead to stories in themselves. But I think a lot of the time, where I get story ideas from are one, people who get in touch with me, say, hey, this such and such thing is happening. Might be something you should cover, or two, something that I just find in my daily scrummaging of information. I guess the other one too is just intake of information. If you read lots, if you check out multiple news outlets every day, surf the social media, there will inevitably be something that pops up that will pique your interest. But that's just a starting point. You need to dig into it and find your own information, connect with the people who would know more about that story. Or if it's, for instance, something that's science-based, you need to speak to an authority on that issue. But again, these story ideas can come from anywhere.
Yeah. And I think that's something too that is important to impart on the participants here, is that it's okay to follow, to let something like Facebook or a post on social media be the seed of the idea, but that's never the story. The story isn't that it's a Facebook story. You have every right as a journalist to ask and inquire, but for people who aren't journalists, they might not feel like they have that like that organization behind them to back asking for it. But I think that if your approach is, I'm going to say neutral, but it's also professional-ish sounding, that I'm always surprised at the people who say yes to my interviews, especially because I'm new at being a journalist and working in the news realm. And so for the participants here who they're not sure if they're allowed to ask someone, you're allowed to ask someone. The worst they're going to say is no. Okay, so we are rounding up for our time, and I did want to help with some resources. So I had asked you to prepare a sample of how you ask someone for an interview. I have one of my own, but would you like to share yours first, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I can share mine really quickly here, and I will say there, for anyone who's kind of new to this business and trying to get into journalism. You don't necessarily need to go to J school to be, quote unquote, a journalist. The first thing, and many people have said this to me over the years, just start writing. If you're interested and curious about something, you start writing. There are a lot of online resources. The Poynter Institute, the Canadian Association of Journalists is another one. Also, you can check out CBC's code of ethics as well, and their principles. These will all lead you down the road to figure out kind of what you want to do as a journalist and how to prepare for an interview of sorts, or to how to find a source. The Canadian Association of Journalists is a great resource. They have lots of stuff on there to help you kind of figure this stuff out, and also how to write pitches, and how to contact people that you want to get interviews with. These days, I've kind of found over the years that it's better to be very quick and to the point with your request for an interview, especially from an official source.
Yes.
So I'm just going to show you a quick kind of exchange in particular here that I dealt with earlier this year. So hopefully you can see that. So this is a quick interview request exchange by email with a DFO official. And, as you can see, I'm a journalist based in Smithers, wondering if I could speak to you about the recent announcement from the Gitxsan Hereditary Chiefs regarding the ban on non-Indigenous anglers for their territories this season. I'm curious to know what DFO's position is on this move by the GHC, and if there will be any resolution or continuation of talks before the season begins. Would it be possible to schedule an interview with you in the next few days? My contact is below. Thank you, Dan. And so as you can see, my contacts are below, and my email, my phone number. And I got a quick response back from Davis. So pretty straight boilerplate. And again, it's just an example of that. You put out a request. Sometimes the request comes back positive and you have a person that you can speak with and use for a story. Other times you get something like this that is a small comment or a statement, but someone who declined the interview.
Well, and also that I just wanted to say that it's important to note there that in that previous email, that in your subject line in that email, you're already letting them know what you want to be speaking about, that you're asking for an interview request. You get to it, you know her name, so you mention her name and you just let her know generally what the conversation is going to be about, because I think that that's also powerful too, is to not make the person that you're asking for the interview, don't make them do a lot of work. Your links are there. They can find out, they know the organization that you're working for. And yeah, I think that that's important as well. Yeah. And also too, something that just isn't in those emails that I would also note is very helpful to let your interviewee know is that if it's a live interview or a recorded interview. I've started doing that where I say this is going to be a recorded interview, a recorded phone call interview. It won't be live. And I just let them know that piece of context as well. Okay, Dan, lastly was I had made a little bit of a slide to just go over the structure of from when you get the idea to having a finished piece. So I'm actually just going to share my screen here really quickly. And maybe you just want to speak on this really. So can you see what I've shared?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just very briefly, just kind of go through this process with the participants as well.
Yeah, sure. So as you can see at the top there in blue, the hook or idea, that's kind of where you got to start from. So one is the hook and the idea, and these things can be, controversial, or they could be, just a check-in with something new. So you come up with the hook or the idea of the story first, and then try to figure out who you want to speak with, who would be able to illustrate in an interview this idea of a story. And so you always want to have more than one person, at least. 2 people is great, 2 or more is better, because you want to make sure that one, you have both sides of the story or all 3 sides of the story. You never want to just have a single source story. That is terrible journalism, in my opinion. You always want to make sure, if possible, you can get 2 people. Having one person kind of lay out a particular point of view is great, but you got to make sure that you get a second point of view as well, if you can't nail a second person with that particular piece altogether. So multiple interviews is a priority, if you will. And then, of course, context. You want to do some research. You want to figure out what's the background to this story in particular. You don't just want to come into it with just straight interviews, unless those interviews help you create that context. A lot of the time we do research, we write a script so that we can set the story up, and then here's who we're speaking to today. And then finally, once you have all the pieces, the recordings, the voiceovers, the script, you put it all together in your edit suite, and you want to make it compelling. You also want to make it interesting to listen to, and you want to make it clear and concise. With radio, you're always creating an atmosphere. You want to bring people into the story. That's the one thing that radio does very well, and podcasting does very well. You can create this amazing atmosphere with sounds from the ground, water, a protest, all kinds of things that you can create this atmosphere to bring people into the story, so you make them feel like they're there. And then once you put it all together, you listen to it over and over and over again. You try to refine it as best as possible before you release it to the wide world, and making sure that you cover the principal basis, that you're being accurate, that there's transparency, that you have all sides of the story, and that it's clear and concise.
That's right. Well, I really appreciate this, Dan. I think that this is really helpful information, whether or not someone is approaching an interview as a news person or as a reporter / journalist, or if they're just considering doing interviews as a part of their podcast or radio show. I just think that this is generally very helpful. So for our participants here, Dan is going to make just a list of some of those resources that he mentioned as well. And so I'll share that with you in the presentation notes at the end of this workshop. Dan, thanks so much for giving me the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I really enjoyed our conversation. And of course, if anybody out there has any questions or wants to follow up, they can always reach me at danielmesec@gmail.com. I'm always open to chat about journalism, and anybody who's new to this and wants to kind of get into the game. Definitely living in a small community is different reporting tactics and principles than living in a big city or a big center. I love it, and we need more of it. So if you have any questions or you want to follow up, please reach out.